We're joined here today, coming up on the tail end of 2019, with Clark Peterson. Three of us go way back to our days of CCA, and Clark's been in this business for some time and has an illustrious background that includes CEO of Telesphere, which, like Dave's company, was sold to Vonage a few years back. He then went to become president of Vonage Business, chief evangelist, and is now serving on three different boards, chairman of the Cloud Communications Alliance, and also on the boards of TPX and Alianza. Since you guys were the two of the co-founders of Cloud Communications Alliance and arguably two of the most successful CEOs in the space, what are your thoughts on where we sit today compared to where you guys were a few years back when you launched this thing?
No, thanks, Mike, and I appreciate the intro there, and it's great to be with you and Dave here on this call. And yeah, it's great to take a step back too, and I think fledgling is probably a good word to describe it. I think, back then, people take it for granted, but, we were out there just trying to convince people that the cloud was something cool and that things were, more intelligent if you could get them to a centralized place like that where you have more controls and the ability to change features and functionality and roll it out to tens of thousands of people overnight versus, doing PBX software upgrades one by one. And so it was a challenge. And I think, the CCA served a purpose early on to really to give all of those underdogs who were evangelizing cloud when cloud wasn't understood, and people trusted blinking lights in their closet more than they trusted something they couldn't see. It gave us a format to be able to really get the word out, to be able to kind of compare ideas, and for those of us who were early pioneers there to advance the industry when there wasn't much help to advance it and it wasn't naturally there.
Right.
Yeah, I would also throw in there that we were doing this at a time where things were not developed. We had lots of jitter, chop, drop calls, all those things that made it really difficult to talk people into trusting the cloud and not just traditional wired-line phones. So that was some crazy days. And so we leaned on each other at the CCA because basically it was just, 6 or 8 individual companies that kind of came together around a lunch table at a BroadSoft Connections. And we said, this really works. Sharing these ideas is helpful to all of us. So let's do more of that. And so that's how we sort of launched the first CCA meetings, is that we would fly to be together for a day and a night where we just went deep with our teams and had some really powerful discussions that changed the trajectory of all of our businesses. So that's the spirit in which we launched it and the spirit in which we're growing it now. It's just been such a tremendous difference in the last, 3 or 4 years, really, where we brought the world together. I mean, really the earth, the physical planet, that now we can reach across and get ideas from all of these different companies. And it gives us a really interesting view at the CCA.
Looking back, I mean, I'm really surprised how big and how important the CCA has become. And I think it's because of those, fighting when it was, fighting to really be relevant for all those companies and really fighting to be a thought leader, as we all did for the CCA when there was no thought leader in the industry, has now put us in this position where it's just fascinating to see, back in those early days, as you know, Dave and Mike, we were out there trying to convince people, why would you ever trust anybody a brand you haven't heard, who's got this thing in the cloud, compared to the Avayas and the Ciscos and the Mitels and, these huge brands who they all knew very well. And now you look at all those big brands have all made moves to the cloud. They're all made big acquisitions to get to the cloud, and, they're with us, and a lot of them are members of the CCA now. And so it's really come to an amazing level, not only here domestically, but internationally. And to your question, Dave, of, what's 2020 hold for us? I think it's kind of like Yogi Berra's comment of the future ain't what it used to be. It's moving quick and it's changing exponentially. And as you look at Gartner's forecast that they gave is actually surprising to me how aggressive it was, in that they said 74% of the companies who haven't yet moved to the cloud are going to do so in the next 2 years. So, if that's true, the great majority are going to be moving to the cloud, and they're going to be moving there pretty quickly, making their decisions of who their provider is next 2 years. And so you have a lot of the earlier providers who are already out there really in this race to make sure, even though their brands might not be as big as others, to make sure they're out there and cutting through the noise to stay relevant. And hey, we're the guys who actually know this best. And you have the big guys who are now just getting kind of their boats turned into this market, and to really become experts either by acquisition or by quick learning there to really provide a great customer experience for those looking to move to the cloud. So I think 2020 holds a lot of competition, a lot of larger providers come into the market, as well as those who have been there and been in the market for a while. I think internationally it starts to grow more as the penetration is not nearly as much internationally as it has been domestically. And I think you see the market in both domestically and internationally start to go up market as we look at right now. The small size kind of microservices have been about 36% penetration in the US, and the mid market's about 17%, and the large enterprise is about 9%. And so overall, you have about a 24% blended market penetration in the US. But that penetration started from the bottom as the Rings and the Advantages and the 8x8s did a great job to really start to bring cloud communications to the smaller companies. Now that's more penetrated, and everyone's trying to move up market. So I think in 2020, you see a lot of moving up market, a lot of providers trying to position themselves to be players as this goes up market, and be able to have really focus on a whole different type of customer. That best effort isn't good enough, and you have to have quality of service and security, and they want a lot more than they had on the small side. And so they look to you have to address those markets as this moves up market. And I think you also see a lot of integration happening with CRMs. You see a lot of convergence between UCaaS, CCaaS, CPaaS as all those platforms start to converge and really be a common cloud communications platform to give people microservices of mixes and matches of what they really need to create the solution they want for their company and their employees.
It is striking to me how just the evolution of this industry. You're right. It started with micro SMB, then it went to SMB, mid-market, and now enterprise. And with it, there's a whole new set of challenges. And I remember first time I went to a CCA meeting, I think I just recently was invited by a fellow peer, Jeffrey Pearl, to come to one of the meetings. And that first meeting, I think the first meeting I went to, there's about 20 of us sitting around in a circle in Miami at ITW, I think it was, or one of those conferences. And we spent a whole lot of time talking about challenges that UCaaS companies face in delivering a customer experience, and how do we overcome some of the impediments, if you will, like you talked about jitter, Dave, and quality of service. Because I'm hearing from partners out there in the market about deals that are going down now that are tens of thousands of seats. That brings with it a whole new set of challenges. So what do you think, Dave and Clark, are the big things that as former CEOs that you'd advise CCA members to really get focused on for this year in order to capitalize on that market opportunity?
A couple of things, and I've been involved personally in selling some deals that were 30,000 seats and more. What's critical is integration for them. They all want to be able to, they don't want to have to change out their network for you. They want to be able to have quality of service. So SD-WAN becomes important. They want to be able to have QoS over their existing network and not have to dismantle that. They want integration with their CRM. So a lot of them are on, Office 365. And so they're looking for, hey, how can I live in Salesforce and Office 365 and still have click to dial or other features that I want. They want collaboration, and so they want the same providers to be able to give them all the desktop tools they need to be able to have video conferences and other collaboration tools. So it is that product portfolio is much more robust. The level of quality of service guarantees and SLAs that they demand is much more. One of the customers I sold, personally involved in this selling, was over 30,000 seats, but they wanted daily MOS scores, right? Every day they'd be able to see what the MOS score was in every individual office around the country, So that's the kind of QoS type of delivery they want. They want security, and they want to be able to have certifications for HIPAA and other things like that. And they want your ability to do multi-location, as their larger customers are usually spread out geographically. It becomes critical to be good at multi-location. And I think one thing we'll see out there in the market, there's a lot of people wanting to move up market and have great ambitions to do that. But, you know, I have an ambition to be an NBA basketball player, and it's never going to happen.
Right.
So you gotta have all the tools and the resources. And I think as these companies have multiple locations, it's very rare to find one that all my offices are ready to go to the cloud right now, just move me over. You know, that's not the case. It's, hey, I've got these 20 offices that I'm ready to move to the cloud, and maybe 40 others that are still with PBXs that have a useful life left. So I want a hybrid solution that enables them all to talk together with a common dialing plan and one receptionist console, and you know, 4-digit dialing between 40 offices or whatever it might be. So you have to be able to have, you know, SIP trunking and things like that that actually connect all these offices together and make it to where the cloud can live with the on-prem during a transitional period like that as a hybrid.
Yeah, you know, the other thing I would say is the cloud really has changed everything about communications. And part of that is some of the incredible improvements that have been made through the use of things like SD-WAN. You just talked about the importance of that to the larger enterprise. And that's changing and disrupting everything again. So, you know, back in the day, we had talked about how we were going to disrupt everything. And basically, we just became a little disturbing instead of like a disruptor. But on the other hand, it has over time truly disrupted everything we've known about telco and put it in the cloud. And so look what that's done. It's pretty cool when you think of it. We were talking about how we were going to live without level 3, for instance, the PSTN, that's going to go away. It's going away. It's actually going away now. And so some of these things that we had future eyes on, and everybody said that's never going to happen, it's happening now. And just going to a CCA meeting, you see it. You see the lights go on for people when they realize how massive this change is. And so it's so fun to be part of that. And I think that 2020, we're going to see even more of that. The CCA is growing at a record rate because companies from all over the world say, I want to know more. I want to know what I don't know, because we end up living with various kinds of information that is true or not true. And we can just get in one room with a whole bunch of heads of these companies and discuss it. And one of those things that happened in 2019 was the Avaya thing. And oh my gosh, one of the largest wired premise-based equipment makers in the world just basically gave themselves over to a cloud-based company, RingCentral. And so that is going to, I think, bode well for the other premise-based companies. So let's just kind of take a look at Mitel, for instance. They're probably next. But, you know, I mean, it's really getting to be fun for me to watch some of the stuff that you and I talked about years ago and a decade ago, really. And it's now coming into focus, and things are changing because of it.
Those who were there at the September meeting in DC, who hadn't been to a CCA meeting for a while, realized just how large it's become. And it really has become the can't miss meeting for anyone in the industry of the year. And to Dave's point on how fast this is moving, you need that edge. You know, you really need to have, you need to be part of a network where the thought leadership is being shared at a level that you know what's happening, what's changing. Because if you're not, it's just changing too fast to keep up with just your own organic, thought gathering and information gathering. The CCA really creates that medium for people to know where this is all going. They hear from all the experts in the industry, all the analysts now. I mean, all the analysts that were there in DC, I mean, they all looked at this as they have to be there, right? If you're a financial analyst covering the industry, if you're an expert in the industry from the analyst from Frost and Sullivan or Forrester or Gardner, and they really look at the CCA meeting now as the one you need to be at to really know where's this all going in the future. So it's true. It's moving too quick to not have a medium like the CCA to keep you informed. Right? You have those who really have been in the industry, know the industry well, but maybe they were smaller because it really started off with a lot of smaller companies. So they're trying to figure out, how do I break through all the noise? You have the major players coming in now, and you're looking at the guys, hey, we know how this is really done. We know what we can provide the best customer experience, whatever their thoughts might be. How do they really play in this game? And then you have the really large guys who have great brands and great resources, and they've looked at it almost like a save tool for many of them, because they didn't want to have to spend the resources to join all the cloud licenses or different platforms and things like that than we had when they had this huge base already sitting there on an already paid for network. So now they're making that transition. They're coming to the cloud. And it's like, how do we do this? And so I think there's different groups looking to solve this problem, and I think that's really why the CCA is so meaningful. I think we appeal to both the very large companies who might be newer to this whole industry, as well as the smaller guys who are trying to stay relevant as this ship moves to bigger oceans.
It was all about the UCaaS, pure UCaaS providers who were all emerging, fighting for market share, disrupting the larger providers, to now you've got certainly companies that are mainly focused on UC, contact center service, but you also have those that are trying to pivot. So it's the legacy providers that are trying to pivot. It's not just the Avayas and the Mitels, but it's also the large legacy service providers. It's the traditional VARs, right? The tremendous value for a lot of folks coming to this meeting now is you've got one place where you've got both constituencies present. So it's one place where the top executives from the industry can go to figure out, how do we solve these challenges to better equip themselves to grow. And ultimately, the growth is tied to delivering on customer experience. What do you think about that, of the Avaya RingCentral deal, number one? And number two, what advice do you have for either the Avaya VARs that are trying to make that pivot, and also their enterprise customers that are sitting on a prem-based system today?
Obviously, a really smart deal for Ring, and it was reflective in their stock price. Obviously, had a huge bump. For them to be able to have access now to all these mid to large enterprises that were all premise based, and be able to have an inside leg there to be able to sell them communication services. Great deal. I think at a great price there to have that optionality. And I think for Avaya to be able to have a pathway to the cloud for their customers was also advantageous for them. I think the difficulty that will come from the deal is just in the execution part, right? I mean, there's a lot to go from where Ring has been playing in the past at more of the, real small level, probably, less than 10 seats, let's call it, per customer or per location, let's say, to now going to where you're replacing PBXs. You might have 400, 500 people in a building, and they have, overhead paging it's tied into, and all of this functionality that we're used to when you do PBX replacement, multiple offices, and they want SD-WAN, and they want security. They want you to do their firewalls. They want QoS guarantees. They want MOS reporting. I mean, that's a far cry from where the industry started off for some of these providers who are focused more on the micro level. So I think for the Avaya VARs, to your second point, I think they have the one option that they have there. And I think, like I said, it was a smart deal, but there's a lot of options out there. And I think one provider is probably not going to fit such a vast, disparate group of Avaya customers out there worldwide. They'll still need multiple providers to be able to really take care of all those different needs of all those different customers and different sizes with really large enterprise type of needs.
Right.
And so it's critical for companies to come together with other companies to make themselves better and larger, and instead of being so disparate across all of these small companies, what's a buyer to do, for instance? So we've tried to look at that from the UC buyer's perspective. is all that M&A good for a buyer?
I think, when you go back to that Gartner forecast, the 74% of these guys all figuring out which cloud provider they're going to use in the next 2 years, that's forcing a lot of these really large players who aren't yet in the industry to figure out a path, because speed to market becomes critical. You can't just organically start building all this stuff, or you're going to miss the whole 2-year window there where most of end users figure out their cloud communications provider. So there'll be, because of that, a lot of M&A activity, consolidation in the industry. I think for the individual buyers, the thing they have to look at, they'll have big brands enter the market and a lot of resources enter the market. So on one hand, it might look like, well, I've got some choices I'm familiar with. On the other hand, it's really the little bit of the buyer beware of. You'll have people there's big brands that'll move into the market who are still really kind of on training wheels as far as providing some of these services. And most buyers don't know to look behind the curtain for things like service delivery and what systems do they use for their service delivery, for their billing, for their customer support, for their help desk and trouble tickets. To really know who's going to provide that ultimate customer experience, you can't tell just by the brand recognition. You really have to be smart on what questions to ask to know who's going to be able to best take care of you. And like a lot of the latest technology, it's not the brands of the past sometimes aren't the brands of the future. When you look at companies, who's done a good job on the video collaboration like Zoom. I mean, who had heard of Zoom in the past, right? I mean,
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, these brands aren't your brands of the past that are your well-known brands. They're hard charging, very good technology firms that are creating the platforms of the future that are completely different than the platforms of the past.
How much of the fact that you're now seeing a disaggregation of technology providers going into the enterprise, driven by digital transformation programs, and the fact that you can now procure best-in-class technology from multiple technology providers, how much of an impact has that had on the growth of traditional agents that are now pivoting to really being cloud consultants and almost becoming trusted advisors to CIOs? The growth of the channel and how much of that's driven off of what we talked about in terms of some of these niche players being able to deliver?
No, it's a really interesting question on the indirect side. And I saw this evolve on, when I was early on in the cellular industry with Cellular One and part of companies that Craig McCaw built, Nextel and others. And we used to say, it got to the point where the agents were making so much money that they were creating their own promos to be able to acquire customers because they had such large commissions for acquiring a customer. They could do all these creative things. So the saying was, if you got your cell phone for free, you paid too much, because you should have gotten a cell phone free, and you should have gotten a free mountain bike or a trip to Hawaii with or whatever, because the promos just were crazy. And I think we're kind of seeing that with the traditional telco agents right now. Service providers, paying, 5 months up front or whatever it takes to be able to get their mind share. I think that's going to change. And I think it's important for indirect channel to know what's going to change here as you start to look at the industries starting to become more automated with microservices and automated portals, and companies being able to if I want to create a cloud communication seat in the future, I think you'll just be able to do drag and drop down of, I want this CPaaS feature and this CCaaS feature and this UCaaS feature, and I want this to be in this common seat, and it's all on a common stack in a common platform, and then be able to provide a solution that I create myself through a portal and turn it on. And so for that type of service, I don't really need as smart, let's say, as consultants or advisors. I think in the future, you'll see customers be able to do a lot of things on themselves and be able to self-provision their own seats. And so data VARs, or some of the things you mentioned, Mike, I mean, I think some of these guys who've been looked at in the past as more of distribution partners versus agents, and at maybe a smaller level, they can actually be service providers in some certain, right, because you may not need a big service delivery group. You may not need a large customer care group. So then you start to see all this focus on different verticals and being able to really uniquely look at the market. And I think just like we had in the cellular market, to go back to that analogy, I mean, we start off with all this, if you look back at, Western Wireless and Nextel and VoiceStream, and there's all these different cellular providers, kind of went down to the big four of AT&T Wireless and Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile, who are still out there today. But that's not the whole market. And if you look out, there's actually over 100 facilities based with their own network service providers on the cellular side still out there today. And then there's all the vertical focused guys with, consumer cellular for the elderly, right? There's Boost and Cricket, and and they all have their different verticals or geo focus, with Metro PCS focusing mainly on certain metro areas and not maybe roaming being their forte. So I think you see that happen. I think you do see consolidation, some big players kind of be the dominant players in the industry on a national or international basis. But I think there'll be a lot of areas to still play for those who really want to strategically focus, just like we saw in the cellular industry.
Yeah. Since you bring up cellular wireless, I got to ask you, what's your thoughts on what's going on with 5G and what kind of impact that's going to make?
Yeah, I think right now it's a lot of marketing. There's a lot of work to do to make it to actually fulfill its promise, because 5G is at such a high frequency, and as I was the first employee help them build out Clearwire. And so, we were at 2.5 to 2.7 gigahertz, a pretty low frequency compared to where they're doing 5G, but still very, very powerful on the data side. So it's a great frequency for data, but the propagation is very limited when you're at those really high frequencies. So it requires a lot of wireless access points to really make it work, a lot of handoffs that have to work well. So it'll be great when you're in a good 5G spot, but you may be surprised how hard it is to actually keep it going as you turn around the corner of a building or go inside the building and all those things. But sooner than later, whether it be through 5G or whether it be through satellite and other mechanisms and kind of city Wi-Fi's, I think internet will be pervasive. It'll be everywhere, right? It'll be ubiquitous as far as being able to very high speed internet access no matter where you go. And so I think the interesting part for that is, why does a cellular provider inherently have to be your voice provider or inherently have to be your messaging provider? I really see the point in time with, you'll have your access providers just like you have on the landline side with your cellular providers could be your access provider, and I could get my access from, AT&T Wireless or whoever it might be. But I should be able to pick, just like I picked for LD back in the days, who my voice provider is. And I might want to pick a voice over IP provider who's just riding over the data side of that 5G wireless or that satellite wireless connection. And I want to pick to them as my voice guy. I want to pick to them for my CPaaS or messaging guy. But it doesn't seem like it needs to be tied to your carrier, has to be your solution provider on the cellular side, like it no longer is on the landline side.
No doubt. So how overhyped do you think it is right now, and when do you think it becomes a widely adopted, usable technology that makes an impact on the enterprise?
From what I'm seeing, I think in the metro areas where they're focused, I think in the next couple of years it will be pretty widely used. But I still think even then there'll be lots of gaps and handoff issues and propagation issues, but I think for the most part, it'll start to take over in the next 2 to 3 years.
Increasingly, more end users are making calls and becoming dependent upon their devices as opposed to desktop phone.
Yeah.
What's the implications on that front, do you think?
But I think it's the nice thing about cloud communications is that's really was built to make any IP device your end device, right? It's not about landline phones. And as everyone in the cloud communication space knows, your PC has been essentially your communication device. Your cell phone has been your communication device for years now. And so it's the cloud communication side is in a great place to be able to leverage this if they leverage it, strategically, to be able to look at all those mobile phones now just have bigger bandwidth to be able to provide more sophisticated solutions to these end users in a mobile environment. So even though they're in a mobile environment, they may, and they will, still want that connectivity between all their co-workers, kind of like a PBX used to do in the past. They want the collaboration tools still. They're still in work groups will want those same features. And I think even more so as people now, it enables them to work from home more, or to work from a commuting type of scenario in anywhere in the world. But that access is there now, or will be there. But now is the solution going to be there? And I think that's where the cloud communications providers have a chance to really have communications that work over those wireless environments and over those mobile end devices.
What are your top predictions for 2020? And what are the top 3 areas of focus for the CCA this next coming year?
As companies begin to pull all these pieces together, let's call it the bandwidth issues or the quality of service and those kinds of things. And I think also there's some regulatory things that we're working on at the CCA right now that are at the FCC level that are going to come to bear in 2020 and create either a lot of damage or we're going to heal it. And so I'm excited about where all of those things go for the average service provider that represents the American public, and larger than that, the worldwide public, because a lot of these American companies are buying European companies in this crazy world of M&A. And so I think it's going to be a bit of a rodeo here this year. I think that there's going to be a lot of things that we've never seen before happen. And I'm just really excited to be in the mix because it's changing so quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree with Dave. I think in the industry, 3 things I'd say, and you heard Dave say 1 or 2 of them is, convergence will be one, integration will be one, and the other will be the move up market, right? I think those are the three big convergence from UCaaS, CCaaS, CPaaS, integration from having to play well with, the Microsofts and all the, the CRMs, the Salesforces, everything that's on the customer's desk as this goes up market. Those all become critical industry factors. I think for the CCA, Dave hit on the point with, regulatory. We become, we had meetings just in the last month with the chairman of the FCC, and then we had meetings the month before with a lot of the commissioners of the FCC. I think they're looking for a common voice in the industry to be able to represent the different service providers, especially as you have things like robocalls and shaken and stir that they're trying to address. And they need that a unified voice to help them face these big issues in the communications market. And I think you see the same thing on the regulatory standpoint from in Europe, where they have the security and privacy things like GDPR, and then you have the same thing happening now with California with possibly even a more strict security kind of regulations. How do we navigate that, and how does the industry continue to provide great services that are secure, but not add too many costs to the industry or too many barriers for providing all their other services. And so I think from a regulatory standpoint, the CCA becomes critical. I think from an international standpoint, for the international companies to kind of continue to drive, like a lot of things we've seen already happen in the U.S., to drive those all internationally and with their own flavors in the international markets. The CCA becomes critical as an international voice. And then I think just for our members, to our earlier points, to know what they need to know to keep up and to change strategically in a way that positions them best for the future, it'll really, really be critical that they're part of the CCA, part of the events, hearing from all the thought leadership and the experts that speak there, but as well as from their peers, and this rare opportunity you have to talk to other CEOs of both service providers and vendors to really know what they're thinking and what their challenges are, what their best practices are, what's working, what's not. There's shortcuts you learn at these CCA meetings that make it a no-brainer as far as the fees people pay to be part of the CCA in comparison to these advantages and things they're able to leverage from the knowledge they gain at these CCA meetings, and the webinars and the podcasts in between the meetings are just critical going forward.
Clark, let's talk a little bit about what happened here this year, 2019, in the CCA, when their first ever survey went out to the whole world. And it was really a joint venture between Converged and the CCA. And maybe we could talk just for a minute about that survey.
Yeah, no, that's great, Dave. I'd love to, because it was our first annual CCA survey, and Converged did a great job as a partner to really help us pull all the information together and do the survey both for all the US as well as all the international providers. So it was really a unique look in that most surveys in the past have been done by your analyst groups there who are a third party to these service providers and maybe not quite as trusted as a source they can be totally forthcoming as they would be to their own organization being the CCA. So the survey, we tried to really get into depth of what are these different providers thinking, where are they going, what's some of their numbers that really hadn't been released before, and be able to look at what's their thought on the industry. And I think they were much more transparent with us in the survey than they would have been and have been otherwise in the past with other surveys that analysts and everyone else has done. So I think it's great to have that out there, and I think we plan to do it again this year and take it to another level this year.
You spend a lot of money going to events and sending people all over the planet, and of the ones I've personally attended, best ROI by a wide margin in my participation from in the CCA. Like you guys launched your businesses probably 8 years before AMPI went into the market. It's invaluable being able to learn from others, both in terms of what's working well and what pitfalls to avoid. And you've got the ecosystem partners; they're all there. So the ability to go to one event and have access where the who's who of CEOs in the industry and in the supplier ecosystem, it's invaluable. It's gotten more valuable with each quarter I go to these things. So it's absolutely amazing. Yeah, I think it was 2014 when there were 20 of us sitting around on the lawn at the Diplomat in Miami talking about solving quality service issues. And now in September, I think there were 300 attendees or so.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And obviously you don't get that kind of growth without adding a lot of value. So as Clark, as you look back on your time at Telstra, you built an incredibly successful business. I'd love to get some insights from you in terms of what your approach has been in the past and what can other CEOs that want to grow their business take away from what you've learned and what you've done over the years to build successful businesses?
I think you alluded to it on the culture side, right? I mean, people are key. I've always kind of had the saying that, with enough time and money, people will match you as far as technology and resources, but your people make the difference. And I think to have great people that it's felt by your customers, that they make a difference at the customer experience level, it really takes great cultures and everyone, believing in a common vision and having a common rally cry. And as I work with a lot of different companies now at different levels, I don't take that for granted at all. Like, in the past, I just did a lot of things that focused on it because I was all about culture, as I know you and Dave were. I was always about the people making the difference. And, I see all organizations aren't like that. It really hurts them if you don't have everyone unified across a common vision, across a common cause, and really working passionately for that cause. They'll work so much more, and especially millennials now, if they believe in it as a cause, they'll work so much harder for you than they ever will for the money. And I tell my people, culture is what when your coworkers go home and they go hang out with their friends and their friends say, hey, what's that place like that you work at? Whatever their answer is, that's your culture, right? They're either going to say, it is a great place because of this, this, and this, or they're going to say, well, it's a job, and I'm working there till I find something else. So I've always created culture teams wherever I've gone, and that's been really key to where it was. A culture team was a mix of people representing all the different disciplines of the company. So there might be 10 or 12 people on a culture team, but those employees essentially met every month, and they helped create all the elements of the culture, whether it be, hey, where are we failing, and what do we need to do to fix that? Like, I remember one group was like, hey, we're having all these things where we don't understand each other's jobs, and so we like to promote that we have a walk a mile in my shoes program. We work in everybody else's jobs for a few days. They did the ideas, they drove it, and those people were great, as well as all the events. And we looked for any opportunity we could to show our employees how much we cared about them and how important they were. And that, like in the Cellular One days, they were, they had a great culture. Then it was always, hey, there's no cash registers at corporate. All the customers are in the field. That's where all the action is, and that's where you have to empower people. And and there's failure along with empowerment that you have to totally be ready for and accept that if you empower people, they might not do things as good as you might think you can do them yourself, but it's worth that in the long run to have people empowered who can make decisions.
What's the correlation between a great culture and that same company delivering a great customer experience?
That's tied together. So customer experience is that experience outside of the company. A culture is that experience that employees have. And so it's much of the same thing. It's all about bringing happiness to the customer. But before that can happen, you got to bring happiness to the employee, because those are the ones that are going to take care of your customers because they love this company. They give blood to keep this company alive. And when you have that kind of an employee base that just love each other, they love the company, they love what they're doing, man, there's just no stopping a company like that. And I think you built one there at Telesphere as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I know Dave did a simple signal. I think to Dave's point, it's building it to the point that they love their job enough that it's felt by the customers, right? And that's when you know that it makes a difference. To answer your question, Mike, on how much does it really drive it to that next level? And you can think of companies. I think of some right off the top of my head is when I rent a car. If I rent a car from Enterprise, those guys are like, they've got a great culture. Those guys are like excited to see me, and they bring out their iPad and they're saying all these things. They've been trained well to create a great customer experience, and they like doing it, right? They love doing it. And those same companies have all these measurements too. They're constantly seeing how they're doing and how to get better, and the net promoter scores, and the person you talk to next is asking how the person did before, and and so I think there's a lot of, go to simple things like In-N-Out Burger. They take care of me better than other places, and it's Dave wouldn't know that because he eats too healthy, but there's places you can tell they've been trained, they like their jobs, and they have great cultures, and it shows with their experience to the customer.
How important is it for them to really be dialed into what's the culture of the company I'm thinking about doing business with?
I think it could be one of the key differentiators as we go forward, because I know a lot of the big players who are coming in here and have some good technology really have some big gaps on the customer service side. And just to reach somebody who knows what's going on is a challenge. And so it's one of those things customers really need to do their homework, because in this business where a lot of times you're under a contract, you sign up for somebody and you find out their customer service is horrible. Then it's painful to get out of that contract. So I think for those who have great customer service, you need to lead with and really get that out there, how important that is and what questions those customers should be asking to determine what providers can provide that kind of level of service. And if you're other guys who don't have that, you need to get there, because you can only, fake it so long that you have that kind of customer experience to provide or not. And so but it's critical to get there, because I think the technology will all get there. It'll become a little bit table stakes for a lot of the technology pieces. And so that customer experience becomes very important.
Think about 20 years ago when AT&T was a monopoly. It was a utility. They didn't have to do much on the customer service side because there was no real competition. But today, competition is tough. And so I would say that customer experience is actually a product. It can be sold like a product. We have great customer service. Everybody wants to say that, but those who truly do are going to stand out beyond the rest. They're going to grow faster than the others. And I'm thinking we're seeing that proved out in real life right now in 2020. All right.
So Clark, appreciate you coming on today. It's been a great conversation. I know we could probably go on for another hour or so.
Yeah, and thanks, Mike. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it's energizing to talk about how far things have come from the CCA and the industry, as well as where it's going, because like I said in the beginning, the Yogi Berra statement, the future ain't what it used to be. And it's more exciting than I think anyone realizes as this transformation happens in communications. That's, there hasn't been a communications transformation like this, anything near it since its beginning. It's just been, large companies like AT&T having divestiture and having Lex and CLEX, you know, but all the services were kind of common. It was just the competition changed. Now you just have all the solutions moving to the cloud and all the services moving over different ways to deliver it from a mobility and wireless standpoint, and the solutions becoming so robust that everything's changing. So it's exciting, it's challenging, and it's really fun to talk about it. So thanks for putting this together.